All right, let's go ahead and get started. I think that we still have a few people that are trickling in, but we have this set up to be about an hour and a half. I want to try to keep it to an hour if we can. But let's go ahead and get started. And those who join us, they'll be able to catch the recording. So yes, this is being recorded. Hopefully everything works out with that. So my name is Alana Davis. I'm your host and meetup organizer. I work with e-commerce shops to remove friction from the buying process. My main focus is really on rescuing Shopify websites, making them more effective in attracting more visitors, providing better SEO, and increasing conversion rates, all at a fraction of the cost of a full redesign. Here's our agenda today. As I said, we have a full hour and a half. I want to try to keep it to the 60 minutes if we can, but we'll have a little bit of leeway in that if needed. But we do have a lot to cover. This will be recorded, assuming everything works. I should hopefully have this out to you all by later today or first thing tomorrow morning, if it does work as I hope it will. A quick shout out to our sponsors. Shopify is more than just an e-commerce solution. You can sell anywhere to anyone with Shopify's e-commerce platform and point of sale features. And then Jason LD for SEO transforms your SEO with rich results, a program that allows you to show rich review stars, price, and availability in Google search, Bing, and Pinterest. And I will share links to both of them in the chat for you in case you would like to visit and learn more. I do have a couple more events that are currently slotted for September, October. Then we're going to take a mini break for the holidays before we get back at it again in January. So expect to see some emails coming out over the next couple days for September's meetup. If you do have any topics or areas you want me to explore for the meetup, please do let me know. I'm going to send out a feedback request form later today as well or early tomorrow. I would love to hear the stuff that you actually want to hear about and learn about. So also tell me what's working well or not so that I can continue to provide a valuable resource for you. All right, so without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. Brett Fish is the founder and principal of Scopo Marketing. I'm going to let Brett talk a little bit about kind of who he is and what he does. And so I'll kind of let him do a more formal introduction for y'all. So welcome, Brett.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Really glad to be here today. Glad you could all make the time to join us. This is a really hot topic right now, and I know there's a lot of questions and there's some misinformation floating around there. So I'm excited to kind of walk you through this. Hopefully provide a lot of value to you as far as understanding everything that's going on right now, and answer any questions you have on this topic to set you on the path to the most success. So let me bring up the slides. All right. So the title of this presentation is relevant. What now? Because I know a lot of us are in the same boat, and I can tell you, even as someone who owns an agency and does this all day, every day, and is working with it all day, every day, there's a lot in flux right now. Since all these big privacy updates started hitting and we started experiencing all these lovely technical glitches and issues as far as tracking and reporting and all these other things that they've caused. So our goal today is to kind of walk you through what has happened and why, and give you some actionable tips and things that you can do to set yourself up for the most success. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at these big changes in the industry that center kind of around user privacy and the changes that are being put in place around that, how they affect things like tracking and attribution of your advertising and promotional efforts. We're going to look at, Apple iOS 14.5 was really their big update that kicked all of this off industry-wide. We're going to look at why that was such a big deal and what did it change. Apple iOS 15 is coming out this fall. It hasn't arrived yet, but that's going to bring some interesting changes on the email marketing front. So, we're not email marketing experts at Scopo, but we'll talk a little bit about some of those changes that are coming. And then how to use these social advertising platforms in this new setting and landscape, and certain steps you can go through with your stores to set yourself up for the most success make sure you're capturing as much data as possible, kind of in this flux vortex of evolution and changes in the industry that we're all kind of in right now. So a quick introduction of me. My name is Brett Fish. I'm the founder and principal at Scopo. I was born and raised on the beautiful island of Guam, but I've been a Portlander for the last 20 plus years, which very much dates me at this point. I'm a dad of two. I live in Cedar Hills. And I've put my email and my LinkedIn profiles on this screen. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Shoot me an email if you have any specific, technical questions that we don't get to on the presentation or in the Q&A, or if, in a week you think of something. I'm glad to be a resource. So feel free to reach out. So a little bit about Scopo, and just to kind of set the stage of who we are, and hopefully that we know what we're talking about when it comes to this whole topic. We're a social advertising and online advertising firm. Traditionally, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been primarily focused on Facebook and Instagram platforms and advertising. We're a Facebook preferred business partner agency, and we are certified and credentialed across a bunch of their different product offerings. And then very recently, we became a TikTok agency partner as well, with all the growth that network is experiencing. So we were also part of a really cool program that actually just got retired about a month ago that was called the Facebook Marketing Partners for Technical Services program. And so we kind of partnered with Facebook as an implementation vendor for them, helping a lot of their big advertisers with tagging and tracking and technical implementation around product catalogs and Facebook and Instagram shopping and a bunch of things like that. So we worked hand in hand with them as a lot of these changes were coming through, and have done a lot of work helping big brands and advertisers with tracking, with tagging, with reporting, with all these things that are kind of happening here. So we bring a little bit of that experience to the table, and we get to work with a lot of cool clients, some of which are on the screen. Many of those are actually Shopify powered stores. So whether you're on Shopify or whether you're just kind of a marketer or maybe using another platform, we've had a lot of experience with a lot of different clients and platforms. So all that being said on the intro, big changes in digital marketing. So really I'd say 2021 in general, but really the last 4 or 5 months have brought a lot of changes to this industry. And if you're confused, if you're overwhelmed, if you're not getting results, there's a long list. You're not alone. I get to be a part of a lot of Slack groups and Facebook groups and Discord groups with other agency owners like ours that are doing the same thing and experiencing the same challenges. And this is something that everybody is trying to figure out and work with right now. So I'm hoping today to bring you some value and bring you some insights into what we're seeing. But it's big changes for everyone. So before we dig into some of the actual tips and strategies and things like that, I want to set the stage so that everyone kind of understands some of these big changes we're talking about and why they came to be and what's happening with them. So a lot of you will remember this screen that probably came across your NBC News or your CNN or whatever news you tune into. When Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, testified before the US Senate. This was in 2018. And there were a lot of jokes and memes that came out of this because of Zuckerberg's kind of robotic stance and responses. But this was an important moment because it signaled a shift in interest in the US government and regulation around online privacy and user privacy. And they really grilled Zuckerberg and others about how Facebook and their other apps were tracking users and what information were they tracking. And it really was a big signal because if you think about it, Facebook, who owns Instagram and Messenger and WhatsApp and a bunch of other apps, Apple, Google, they're all US headquartered companies in tech. And they knew this was going to be coming, and they knew there was possible government regulation and intervention and maybe even, fees and punishments and things like that coming down the line, and they wanted to prepare for it. So that's what really spurred a lot of this privacy regulation that we're experiencing now. So like I said, digital brands and platforms are scrambling to get ahead of it. Most have probably heard Apple was kind of the first one through the wall on this one as far as implementing these things. A lot of you have probably heard about their iOS updates, and we'll talk more about those iOS updates and why they're a big deal and how they're affecting everything. but they're not going to be alone. Google has announced that they're going to be removing third-party cookies in the future. They've kind of pushed that back a few times, but odds are the same kind of updates and restrictions are coming across all platforms. So, and this is where I always insert a quick tracking joke, because as marketers, obviously we love as much data as possible. But with all of this, the tracking around this was never really around individual people. And I love this image of like the guy with a Trent gun, right? Like hunting you down and tagging you. It wasn't ever about that. And really the information that was received by marketers was more hashed, encrypted. Like instead of Brett Fish clicked this ad and bought this on the site, it was, user A saw this ad, liked it, went to the page and made a purchase, and being able to tie that back. So it was always less about really tracking people and individuals and users. And it was more just about trying to market diapers to people who might be interested and in the market to buy diapers. That's just my quick take, but I digress. The important thing with all of this is that all of this that we're experiencing right now is just the tip of the iceberg. The Apple update that started all this hit in April. We're only 3 or 4 months into this. Other platforms are going to be introducing similar changes and updates in the future. And it's less about kind of freaking out and saying, oh no, what's going on? And more about how do we continue to evolve and how do we continue to kind of change things and change our approach as these changes come. And then the other thing is that it's not just Facebook and Apple, right? You're going to hear a lot about Facebook today and Apple today. As I mentioned, Apple was the first one to introduce these updates and really kind of start the tidal wave on all of this. All these other platforms will be following suit. Excuse me. And it's not just Facebook that's affected. Any app on the iOS platform right now is affected, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat or LinkedIn. Any app where you take an action like clicking on an ad and you go into a browser, another app is affected by this. Facebook's just kind of the biggest with the biggest advertising ecosystem. So they were kind of the ones that have gotten the most notoriety around all this, but it affects all apps. So with that kind of being the backdrop of what has happened and how we've gotten here, we're going to look at what's changed. So starting with Apple iOS 14.5, which started rolling out in April-ish, they added privacy features that affects our ability to track user activity between any of these social apps, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it might be, and through to web browsers mostly, but in general, any tracking kind of between apps. Apple called this their Apple Tracking Transparency, App Tracking Transparency, ATT prompt, and it lets users opt in or opt out of tracking. And essentially what happens is if a user opts out of tracking, then we lose a lot of the comprehensive data that we used to get, not individualized, no personal info, but just these users are taking these actions off of ads and onto your website and being able to kind of track and report back on those. So it's a big deal. And as a quick note, I mentioned iOS 15. iOS 15 is going to have it hasn't arrived yet. It's supposed to be coming this fall, but it's going to allow, it's going to disrupt email marketing as far as reporting open rates. Open rate tracking by marketers is going to be affected. So if you're using email marketing for your Shopify store, for your agency, there's going to be big changes around that. And they're introducing a feature that's going to allow users to essentially enter a scrambled, like a hashed email address to sign up or claim offers and do things like that ties back to their Apple email address, but is not their actual email. So you're actually, if you're doing lead gen or anything like that, it's very possible that soon you're going to start getting all of these essentially non-deliverable, non-trackable email addresses that Apple's now offering their users as kind of an in-between, so they don't actually have to submit their real email address. So these changes are affecting social advertising, they're affecting email advertising. It's going to be across the board and across the industry. So when Tim Cook from Apple, the CEO of Apple, announced this was the tweet he put out. And you can see in the image right here, this is the prompt that users are receiving when they add, Apple iOS 14.5 or after, and they open an app. This is what it looks like kind of in an application where you go to open Facebook and it says, would you like to give your permission to track you across apps and websites, right? So not within the Facebook app, but going from Facebook to a browser, another app. and they give you two options: ask app not to track or allow tracking. Now, when this was ready to hit, there were a lot of people in the industry who were somewhat optimistic and were like, oh, maybe only half of people will opt out. And my take, I tend to be optimistic, but I was like, if you give the average user the choice between track me, which sounds very invasive, right, or don't track me, they're going to choose not to track. And that's going to be a big problem. And unfortunately, from the marketing side, we've seen that play out. Numbers kind of vary a little bit based on source and everything, but about 25% of users worldwide are opting into tracking. So that means 75% are opting out. And in the US, only 4% of users are opting into tracking. One important thing is it's important to remember is this is for Apple iOS users who have upgraded to this most recent level of software. So this isn't Android, other platforms, iOS users who have opted in, iOS users on previous versions of it. This is just for that segment, but 96% of those users are opting out. And as any of you who are in marketing know, iOS users are usually a pretty big chunk of your purchasers and your mix as far as customers and prospective customers. So this is a big deal. So this is a really quick, like very simplified diagram of kind of how things used to work. So essentially what would happen back in the day, in the good old days, was a user would be on their phone, they'd be on Facebook or Instagram, and they'd see an ad and they'd click it. And that ad would lead to their website, right? Where, maybe you're advertising whatever product and takes you to your website to check out the product. When that user went from Facebook to the website, the website, it would carry all sorts of information, right? In the URL and the cookies, it would carry all kinds of information over from Facebook to the website that says, here's the click ID. So they clicked on this ad and it was this user, not an actual user like information, but a hashed kind of user ID. This is the person that came into the website. And then when they were on the website, the user would do, they would look at pages, they'd view your products, they'd add stuff to cart, make purchases. All that information would kind of get stored and get logged in cookies and things like that. And then with the Facebook pixel would get reported back to Facebook. So it was this nice ecosystem where they left Facebook, they went to the website, they took all these actions, and then those actions got reported back to Facebook, and we were able to attribute those actions to our advertising and use it in our reporting. The platform was able to learn about what kind of users are taking actions on the site. So if this user made a purchase, okay, we're going to go and try to find more of those users that are going to make more purchases. And it all worked beautiful. And with the recent updates, now with the privacy, if a user opts out, a lot of that data is disrupted. We are still able to get some data and we are still able to track some events, but what has been lost with users who have opted out with this privacy tracking is the comprehensive and granular data of kind of their whole process. Like we used to be able to see what products did they look at? How many products did they look at? What products were those? Did they add those products to their cart? Did they we lose that kind of comprehensive and full granular view. And now at best for users who opt out, we get one of those events. So if they make a purchase, we don't get to see what products they looked at. We don't get to see what products they added to their cart. We just get a purchase event. If they only make it to an add to cart event, we don't see what products they were looking at to get there. So there's been a big drop off. And in a lot of cases, we also lose who that user was, right? So we don't get to attribute it back to that user, attribute it back to the ad they clicked to get there. So as you can see, it's kind of a big problem that what broke was a lot of the visibility we had, not into individual user data, but just into what users were clicking ads and taking certain actions on your website, and then being able to make good decisions on that data, like reporting and tracking, and then optimizing your campaigns in the platform. So I know this sounds a little bit of gloom and doom. Is this the digital marketing landscape now? Social advertising? Is it all over? Is it the apocalypse? Is it all to the wind and for nothing? And the quick answer is no. But there are obviously changes for us to navigate and evolve with. One thing that a mentor of mine always reminds me is marketing is about attention, right? Way back in the day, People handed out leaflets. Newspaper advertising was dominant for a really long time because print newspaper, that's where a ton of attention was. These digital and social channels, whether it's email marketing, social ads, they still have a lot of attention on them. And advertising was effective before we had the Facebook pixel and all this awesome data. And it'll be possible after, but we are going to have to evolve. So it's not a wasteland. There's still a lot of good things that can be done. And we're going to walk through a lot of kind of some specific implementation tips, things you can and should be doing to see success, and some specific steps for Shopify stores as far as steps you can take to make sure you're getting the most data and the most comprehensive data. Before we jump into that, I wanted to take a breath and a water break for me and see, and you can put it in the chat to Alana and she can kind of help filter. But if there's any questions up to this point on what's happened, what's changed, where we are today, before we kind of jump into some of the specifics on next steps.
So if you have any questions, feel free to enter them now, either to the chat box or the Q&A. I don't have any at this moment. So I guess let's go ahead and keep going.
Awesome. All right. Let me get back in here. Okay, so now we're going to kind of dive into what is different with the social advertising landscape and what's changed. Excuse me. So the first thing is website audiences are going to be more limited. And I want to give a quick explanation of what we consider a website audience. So the way it worked in the past was if you had the Facebook pixel installed on your website, any user that came to your website that had logged into Facebook on their device and there was a cookie that they were a Facebook user, that user got matched and they got added to an audience of your website visitors. And that could possibly be an audience of everyone who's visited your website. That could be an audience of people who have viewed your product detail pages. Could be an audience of people who added to cart, made a purchase. Those are all considered website audiences. And so moving forward, website audiences are going to be more limited because people who have opted out of tracking will not be added to them. So we lose kind of that comprehensive nature of everyone who hit the website that's a Facebook user. We now have in an audience and we can serve them ads, we can retarget to them and do all those great things. Obviously, that change affects our ability to build audiences and have those comprehensive audiences. It affects our ability to retarget. And so for retargeting, when we mention that, let's say a user comes to your website, they view a bunch of products and they add them to the cart, but they leave before they purchase. In the past, we had an audience of all those people. We knew what products they looked at. We knew if they added to cart and they hadn't made a purchase. So we could retarget them with ads and say, hey, come on back. Don't forget your purchase, and maybe offer them a discount. The integrity of those audiences and retargeting gets disrupted. And then, of course, reporting and attribution. So we lose our comprehensive ability to tie back actions that are taken on a site, conversions that happen to our ads, to what campaigns and what advertisements led to those actions, and the attribution of those back to the campaigns as well that Facebook uses to optimize campaigns, right? We said before, they have this amazing kind of algorithm, machine learning that says, hey, Brett made a purchase on this website. This is kind of his overall cross-section of him as a user. Let's go find more users like him for this advertiser that might make purchases. That gets affected by this as well. One of the other big changes that happened with the platform was attribution windows has changed. So in the past, you could choose which attribution window you wanted to kind of look at and measure off of. And it went up to a 28-day window. And what that means is if a user clicked your ad and then made a purchase on your website within 28 days, the pixel would know that and tie it back, and your ad campaign would get credit for that, driving that purchase. Now, a lot of agencies, including ours, were never super keen on the 28-day window because it's a long time, right? A user might have gotten emails or seen a paid search ad or a lot of other things that could have influenced their purchase in that time. So it was a pretty long window. But these changes forced that window to go away completely. And now the maximum attribution window that the platform has is 7 days. So now the maximum we have is a user clicks on your ad, if they make a purchase within 7 days, that will still get attributed back to the ad. Not necessarily sole credit, but Facebook saying, hey, they clicked on an ad and made a purchase within 7 days. We're pretty sure we, made an impact or had an impact on that purchase process. We're going to take credit for it. That has changed a lot. And then, of course, our reporting has been affected a lot. I think I saw a couple comments in the chat as we were getting started about results. It's really tough right now. And one of the things that Facebook has introduced is even what's called modeled conversions, which is not even actual, a purchase or a conversion on your site takes place and it gets reported in Ads Manager, but they're actually using statistical modeling and mathematical equations to try to determine, based on all the information and data points they have, and kind of fill in some of those gaps, right? On, well, this likely resulted in a conversion based on all this data that we have. They're still figuring it out. I mean, what I can tell you as a Facebook agency partner and a former technical partner, they're still figuring this out. Facebook retired their analytics, their Facebook analytics tool, and their Facebook attribution tool this year because all of these changes threw those things completely out of whack and really affected their functionality. And the news we have as of currently is that there is a new tool, if not more than one tool, that will be debuting. I've heard Q4 of this year, but it might be later than that, that will kind of incorporate all these changes and give us something new that we can use for our reporting and our attribution. But it's a work in progress right now. If you're running Facebook advertising, if you have a store, or if you're in marketing and you have an agency, you might be seeing what a lot of people in the industry call zombie conversions, which is you're going into your ad campaigns and your ads and you're looking at what's working and not, and maybe you see one and you're like, oh, our cost per acquisition on this is not good, I'm turning this off. And then you come in 2 or 3 days later and it looks totally normal and respectable and within the bounds of what you would keep running. That's because users who have opted out were getting these data dumps 24, 48, 72 hours later of this data kind of that Apple is feeding back to Facebook for those opted out users. And so it's kind of a mess right now. And we'll talk about some specific strategies and things like that in a few more slides. But these are kind of some of the things that we're seeing that are different with social ads and how this landscape has changed. So with all that being said, there are some new social ads best practices that we recommend that we think are working well from what we see with our clients, excuse me, and with our work. And I want to give those to you. So let's get to it. So how to best to use the social ads platforms now. So the first thing that's kind of a principle philosophical thing is focus on platform engagement, because we can still fully track that. So what that means is anything a user does within the Facebook app, the Instagram app, the TikTok app can still be tracked and reported on with full accuracy and in a comprehensive manner, because it's not across apps. It's not going from the app to a web browser. So focus on things like video. Video is already a big deal, and a lot of people were using video. We use it extensively in our advertising. We use a lot of UGC, which is user-generated content video. But with video, Facebook can tell you how many people watched your video, how many people watched half of your video or watched the whole video. And Facebook can report back on how many users interacted with your Facebook page or your Instagram profile in the last 30 days or 90 days. So all of that on-platform engagement can still be tracked. And we have a couple value add items in a minute on audiences that we see are working that will tie in with this. But a lot of them are tied now to, as opposed to where before we were very reliant on those website audiences. Now we're trying to focus on more audiences and things on platform where there's just more data available at this point. And on that note, building audiences and using audiences in your advertising efforts from social profile engagement and your customer lists. So I mentioned, you can build an audience of everyone who's interacted with your Instagram profile in the last 90 days or 180 days. Those audiences are going to be more robust because they're not affected by the privacy tracking. And then customer lists as well, right? So you can export, if you're on Shopify, it's really easy to do, any e-commerce platform. You can export your customer list upload that into Facebook when you go to create a custom audience, and use those lists as kind of your seed audiences. If you want to create lookalike audiences and do all those things, you can use your direct customer list as well. And then those lists are not as dependent on, did the Facebook pixel and the data report back to Facebook and add these people to the audience, because you're uploading a list directly. So from an audience standpoint, that's kind of where we're seeing a lot of the focus shift. Another big thing that was a good practice to have in place prior to all these privacy changes, but is now, I think, almost an essential, is adding UTMs to your Facebook ads that you can then view on the back end of Shopify and commerce platforms or in Google Analytics. I could do probably a whole follow-up presentation on UTMs and how that works with Google Analytics, but UTM stands for Urchin Tracking Module. It's a very kind of old term, but essentially what they are, they're pieces of data and parameters that are attached to a URL. So when a user clicks on your ad and they go to that website, like in the diagram we looked at, that URL can carry a bunch of information and parameters attached to it, and we can dictate what those are. And what that does is it gives you another source of truth. From my experience, viewing UTMs in the backend of Shopify isn't as reliable and kind of accurate as looking at them in Google Analytics, because Google Analytics is just a more comprehensive tool that was kind of built and designed to work with UTMs. But you can view them in both places, but it gives you a level more of kind of granular feedback and reporting. And we'll look in a second. I have a quick slide on where and how to add those. But that's a best practice now, to give you another source of truth on reporting in addition to what's available in Facebook and the Facebook Ads Manager. And the final kind of main thing is to consolidate your audiences. And the best example here is, when we work with clients in the past before these privacy changes, we would often do retargeting that was, a user that viewed a product or added a product to the cart in the last 3 days, but didn't make a purchase. And we would give them very specific creative and imaging, because they were what we considered a hot prospect, because they had taken that high intent action with just in the last couple of days. And then we had a different audience of people who viewed products or added to cart in the last 7 days, right? Excluding the last 3, right? So in the last 7 days, but not in the last 3, who were a little cooler, right? It had been a few days since they took that action, but it was still fairly recent. And we would do specific messaging and targeting for them. Now, with how these website audiences are more compromised, we see a lot of situations where we have to consolidate audiences. So now maybe instead of doing a 3-day retargeting and a 7-day retargeting, maybe now we're only doing a 7-day, or maybe we're just doing a 14-day window, right? And consolidating those audiences into one audience, so we ensure that they're big enough that we have good deliverability and can get a good result. And it's not just for retargeting. We see this for lookalike audiences and a bunch of other audiences you might be doing. It's worth testing some consolidation. So instead of splitting out maybe a bunch of lookalike audiences into their own ad sets and own targeting and everything, maybe you combine some and stack some of those lookalike audiences into the same audience and see what those results look like, because we've seen a lot of success around audience consolidation. So definitely something to try and test in your efforts. Excuse me. And then I have a couple quick slides here to kind of show you some of those things we just talked about. So for creating audiences, this is a quick screenshot of, if you're in Facebook Business Manager and you go to the Audiences tab and you go to create a custom audience, these are all of the different options and sources you have to create custom audiences on the Facebook advertising platform. And TikTok actually has a lot of the same options on their platform if you're doing any TikTok ads. But what you can see is your sources and Facebook sources. Your sources website, this is what we've talked a lot about on the audiences that have been reduced and somewhat compromised by the privacy changes. And so these are the ones that are going to be more affected. Here is customer list, which is what we talked about, which is you can export your customers and your orders from Shopify or from whatever commerce platform you're on, and upload them here to create your custom audience. And then Facebook sources, video, this is where I talked about you can choose what videos and how far into a video you are. Did they watch 50%? Did they watch 100%? And you can also create audiences from your Instagram account and users who have interacted with that over the last 30, 90, 880 days, and then your Facebook page. So these are all the sources on platform. Maybe if you're running lead ads, here's a lead form. If they interact with your events, these are all the on platform sources that you can create your audiences from that are going to be more robust and not as affected by the privacy changes. And then a quick look at adding UTMs. So like I said, this can be a little more in depth, and I could probably do a whole presentation on this, but to give you a quick look at how this works, when you're building an ad in Facebook Ads Manager, so let's say you're in Facebook Ads Manager, when you're at the ad level, so the level at which you would, add the image or the video or the copy or the headlines or anything like that, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of that panel in that section, there's a section here that's called tracking. And this is where you would select right here. You can see website events and what pixel you're using. And at the very, very bottom is a section that says URL parameters, which is essentially the same thing as UTMs. And if you have those kind of hard coded, if you're hardcore and you already have that string ready, you can enter it in that text field. And then there's also a really super useful link that says build a URL parameter. Clicking that link opens this kind of middle section. And what it gives you here are the main UTM or URL parameters that you can attach to each of your ads. And it's really nice because they, the source, the medium, the campaign name, and the content. And they give you little examples under each one of these as far as like, what would be an example of this? So maybe under campaign source, that would be Facebook. Or one we see a lot often is paid social, right? As a channel. And then what's really cool is, so you can manually type in your UTMs here for each of these, or if you click into any of these fields, this little other screenshot to the right shows you what happens if you click into those fields. Facebook will provide you with what they call dynamic parameters that you can add. So let's say for campaign source there at the top, you say paid social. But then for campaign medium, you don't know if this campaign is going to run. Maybe you've used automatic placements in your ads and you don't know if it's going to run on Facebook or Instagram stories or the Facebook feed or whatever. You can click in, and on this little screenshot to the right with the dynamic parameters, you can add the placement dynamic parameter, and it will automatically insert a URL parameter for where this ad ran. And you can do the same thing for campaign name. You can see on the right, there's a little variable there for campaign name. And under campaign content, there's a little parameter over here for ad name. So you can have those added dynamically. And then once you have UTMs added to all of your campaigns, then you can go and look at them in the Shopify backend, or like I said, Google Analytics tends to be the best kind of way to interpret those and filter those. And Google Analytics is free. So there are some setup items, and there could be a whole other presentation on Google Analytics, but this is how to set up your ads with UTMs and URL parameters to get as much data as possible. So a quick value add for you guys before we get to our Shopify tips. These are some audiences in this new landscape that you should be trying with your ads. These are audiences that we've seen work really well for us. Some of these are ones we've kind of established ourselves, and some of these are tips we've gotten from other agencies around the world that are running this and seeing success. A 5-day view content or a 19-day add to cart audience, a 30-day social profile engagement, which is what we talked about. So anyone who's interacted with your Facebook and Instagram profiles in the last 30 days, a 60-day audience of your website visitors, and a 60-day audience of people who have watched 95% of whatever videos you have out there, either on your page or in your ads, have all been working well. And then the other kind of little value nugget here is we are always using right now the 7-day click, 1-day view attribution setting. The attribution is set at the ad set level at the very bottom of that pane. And just so you guys know too, I'll stop. Alana will have the slides on all this to share with all of you, and we'll have the recording as well. So all of this information will be available to you after to reference in case anyone's furiously taking notes out there. I'm trying to move through this so we make sure we get to all of it. But we talked about attribution a little bit earlier, and right now the attribution that we are seeing provide the best data to us is the 7-day click, 1-day view attribution setting. It's one of, I think, 4 options available for attribution. And it's at the bottom. If you're building your ads in Ads Manager, at the ad set level, if you go all the way to the bottom, there's options there to access, and if you could do a quick Google search too, but how to change your attribution window. That's the one that's working the best for us right now. So as a kind of a final few things, there's a few important steps that if you're doing social advertising at all, if you want to do it in the future, essentially, if it's going to be a part of the mix in you promoting your stores at all, there's 3 main things that are best practices that you need to do within your Shopify store and kind of within Facebook to make sure you're set up to get the most data possible. So the 3 main steps is verifying your domain, your website domain with Facebook. And there will be slides following where I'll take you through very quick steps on how to do this. Step 2 is prioritizing your pixel events within the aggregated events manager. I will show you where that is and how to do that. And 3 is setting maximum data sharing on your store using the Facebook Sales Channel app. And I'll explain why as we kind of go through that. So step 1, verify your domain. And a lot of you might have taken some of these initial steps, but I just want to make sure we walk through this because these are really critical moving forward with your social advertising. The first thing you want to do is verify your domain. I've included kind of the path to get there right here at the top. But in Business Manager, if you go to your business settings and you scroll down to the brand safety section and go to domains, you can add your domain here. If you click this blue add domain button here in the middle, you can add your domain. And when you click that, it's going to give you an option and a text field to add your domain. And then it's going to provide you 3 different options on how you can verify it. They're all pretty self-explanatory to a degree, and they tell you kind of in the options what you need to do that. But you can either add a meta tag to your HTML on your site, you can upload an HTML file to your site's root directory, or you can add a little record to your domain. So like on GoDaddy, if your domain's registered with GoDaddy, you can go into your domain and add a little text record with a string that Facebook provides here below if you choose that option. And you just put that in, and it just shows that you own the domain and that you're allowed to connect Facebook and the domain together. But verifying your domain is step 1. You cannot do steps 2 and 3 with this really unless you do step 1. So definitely step 1 is verify your domain with Facebook using any one of these. And if you have a web dev, they'll probably know how to do this super easy and quick. I find that updating the DNS TXT record with your domain is probably the easiest path. But and if you Google, if you have your domain at GoDaddy, you can Google how to add a TXT record to domain, and it'll give you a full step-by-step walkthrough for whatever your registrar is on how to do that. So that was step 1. Step 2 is prioritizing your pixel events. And I've given kind of all the tech steps here. We'll walk through it with some screenshots. But essentially, if you go to Events Manager, which is where you've always been able to view all of your Facebook pixel data, if you go to your Facebook pixel and Business Manager and you go to Events Manager, you get to this screen here. There's a new tab here at the bottom. There's always been the Pixel Conversion API tab, and you're able to see how many events you've got. And there's this new tab here that says Aggregated Event Measurement. And there's a purple little new tab next to it to make sure you know it's new. This is the only way now moving forward you will get any data on opted out users with Apple iOS. So the long story short is we get these aggregated data dumps back from Apple, and you're able to prioritize what pixel events are the most important to get. And you'll see how this works in just a second. And you'll get the highest prioritized one. And you have to have this set up to capture this data from opted out Apple iOS users. So if you click Aggregated Event Management, it'll take you to this little thing. If you haven't done this yet, if you do have it done, it'll look a little different, and it'll say, view or manage your events. If you haven't done it, it'll say configure your web events. It'll take you to a screen where you choose your domain that you have verified in step 1. And once you select your domain, you will be taken to this screen. And this is where you can add and prioritize your pixel events. You have to be receiving these events on your site to prioritize them. And up in the right-hand corner, there's a little green Add Event button. You click that, you choose the event you want right there from the drop-down. And as you can see, this is a setup that's for one of our clients that is a typical e-commerce store. So we prioritize purchase as our highest priority event. You can see on the left there, it says highest priority, lowest priority. We prioritize purchase, and then following that was add to cart and view content, kind of in reverse order of what someone would take as a purchase process once they get to your site. Two important things to remember here. You only get eight total event slots. And you can see that up in the right corner by the add event button. It says 6 of 8 used. You only get 8 total. And if you want to turn on value optimization for your purchase event, which most people do, which means you're getting value sent back with your purchases, did they spend $10 or $50 or $100? That takes up 4 of your slots. 4 of your 8 slots are occupied just by that purchase event by turning on value optimization. And so you can see the purchase is taking up 4 events, and then add to cart is taking 1, and view content is taking 1. So for most stores, it's not a big deal because you can do purchase, add to cart, view content, and then maybe you're doing a lead or you're doing a complete registration or something like that. But you have 8 total, and 4 of those are occupied with the purchase and with the value optimization. So that's setting up and prioritizing your events. You do this, you save it, and then you're set up to receive your highest prioritized pixel event from opted out Apple iOS users. Okay, and then the final step, and this one is the most relevant specifically in Shopify. All platforms are different, but since this is a PDX Shopify meetup, we're going to walk through it with Shopify, is setting up and having your data run through the Facebook app in Shopify gives you the most data. This also sets up Conversion API, which I'll talk about real briefly when we get to the last slide. But it's another layer of data. It works alongside your pixel to send back the most data possible. And so we're going to do a quick walkthrough of your steps. So first, in the back end of Shopify, under sales channels, in the past, there's been Facebook Shop, Instagram, all sorts of different kind of Facebook entity apps. Those have all been consolidated now into one new Facebook app that you can see here at the bottom of this screen. So what you're going to want to do is go to apps, go and install the Facebook. It's just called Facebook. You install the Facebook app, and then you can remove the other older apps from your setup. Facebook is the only singular consolidated app moving forward. And when you go to set this up, it's going to ask you to connect to Facebook. It's going to ask you to connect to your user, your business page, your ad account, your pixel, and all that. Go through all of those options to connect your store to your Facebook advertising setup. And then after that's all set up and correct, you're going to get to this setup screen when you click on the app. And the last tab here says data sharing settings. And on this tab, you're going to want to make sure maximum is selected. And down below, it's going to show you your Facebook pixel and making sure like this, we're going to track with this. This sets up comprehensive pixel sharing within Shopify. And it also enables Conversion API. The long story short with Conversion API is, as opposed to the pixel that uses JavaScript to send your data back to Facebook, Conversion APIs actually sends those events to a Shopify server, and then Shopify server shares that directly with Facebook. So it's the same data, it's the same like add to cart and purchase events, but done server to server as opposed to browser. So what that does is, if a user has a JavaScript blocker, or if there's a page load error, or anything that can disrupt a pixel event, the Conversion API adds another layer that will give you that same event. One really important point of clarification that's a major misconception in the industry right now: Conversion API does not fix the Apple privacy opt-out. It is not a workaround, a fix, or a solution for ATT tracking. If a user opts out, they are opted out. Conversion API does not fix that, but it is a good best practice layer to have. And since it's built in with this app, you might as well have it enabled. But it is not a fix or a solution. That's kind of something that's being circled around that's unfortunately just not true. I wish it was true, and I wish it was that easy for us to circumvent it, but that's just not the case. So get this all set up, and then the final step is make sure that you don't have your Facebook pixel tracking set up anywhere else in your Shopify store. It used to be under online store and preferences, you'd come and there would be a Facebook pixel field where you just inputted your Facebook pixel ID. Make sure you remove that and save from there. And that if you're using any apps as well, like if you're using Trackify I think Flexify might have done some pixel stuff. Make sure those aren't doing pixel tracking, because if you have it enabled anywhere else in addition to the Facebook app, it could result in event duplication and some things like that. So you just want to make sure it's removed anywhere else it might have been set up previously. But moving forward, the Facebook app is going to be your best practice setup for data capture and sharing with the Facebook platform. They just updated this app. It now does conversion API for all of the events. So view content, add to cart, and they're continuing to improve it. And we have it set up with a bunch of clients, and it works really well. So that's how to set up your Shopify store to get as much data as possible. So that is it. We walked through why these privacy changes came down, what was put in place, how things changed, and then some things you should be doing in your social advertising as well as on your Shopify store to make sure your success is as much as possible. That you're set up for as much success as possible. Like I said, this is still a work in progress. These events hit as recently as April, so it's pretty recent, and everyone is still working through this. But we still see social advertising be really effective with our clients. And these are the ways to kind of set you up for the best success possible. So thank you very much. And we can open for some Q&A. I'm glad to answer specific questions, technical questions, anything like that.
I love it. Thank you so much. Go ahead and leave this screen up if you want, Brett, for a little bit. That way they can get your email.
Sure.
So while there's a ton of questions, so much information. I was like feverishly taking notes myself. I have told Brett previously I'm not a Facebook ads person or ads person in general. So like all of this is super foreign to me. So I love it. This is such great information. Some of these things that were asked definitely I think were addressed in the presentation, but I'm still going to ask them just so that we can kind of circle back just in case. So
Sure.
Jennifer had asked, if there is any reason to keep our Facebook pixel, do you recommend we remove them? And then will Shopify and Google Analytics still work?
If I'm hearing that correctly, the first thing is yes. You should definitely still keep a Facebook pixel added and implemented to your site for tracking 100%. One thing to keep in mind is that we talked a lot today about the users on iOS who have opted out of tracking, but there's still Android users, people who've opted into tracking, right? And a bunch of other people in your audience who the Facebook pixel still works perfectly and 100% for. And Facebook's best practice implementation is what we showed in those Shopify slides, which is using Facebook pixel and conversion API together, sending data back. That's like the best practice. So you should definitely use the pixel. In regard to the question about Google Analytics and everything, if you set up the Facebook app in Shopify and you remove like where it was installed previously and use the Facebook app, you won't receive any kind of interruption in data reporting because it's the same pixel ID and everything else. It's just set up in the Facebook app as opposed to like that old native integration that we showed the screenshot of on the online preferences. So as long as that's the same pixel ID you're using, there shouldn't be any disruption in your data and your reporting.
Okay. And I think you had said too that you recommend using UTMs and the Pixel ID.
Yep.
Right. That's what okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So set up the Facebook pixel, like whatever platform you're on. We walk through how to do that with the Shopify and the Facebook app. But regardless if you're on WordPress or whatever, make sure you have the Facebook pixel set up. The Facebook pixel is kind of standalone in its own. Make sure you have that set up and working. And then when you're building ads, definitely attach UTMs to your ads because now that gives you another source of truth. In the Shopify analytics and reporting and on other commerce platforms, there's usually a section that you can look at UTM flow. So it'll say like you had this many purchases from paid social. And you can also view that data in a tool like Google Analytics. So use them together for sure. They're different and they don't affect each other, but because the UTMs are added at the ad building level. So
yeah, and I think you and I sort of touched on this too before the session as well, that like a lot of this is still sort of in flux. So it seems to me like it wouldn't hurt even if like you weren't sure but you wanted to spend the time to put in UTMs also, I would still do it because then at least if Facebook tracking completely stopped for you for whatever reason, the UTMs will still absolutely transfer over to Google Analytics. So there's no reason not
right.
to do both.
And the note on that too is, Alana, is that, one of my slides, it was, kind of meant to be somewhat comical with the big iceberg, but this is just the first kind of step of all this. All these other platforms are going to be introducing similar things. And so I think if you haven't yet, Google Analytics is a great tool, and there's a learning curve. You can hire people to set it up or whatever, but I would set up a UTM structure that makes sense for you. And even if you're not using Google Analytics and you're only looking at it in like Shopify Analytics, at least you have another source of truth, to your point, other than the Facebook reporting, not just for Facebook ads. This is for everything, right? Email marketing, whatever. It's going to be, I think, an important thing to have moving forward, cross-channel. So now would be a good time to, I think, start looking at that and figuring that out.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And on that same line, Mo had asked, which I clarified a little bit in chat, but I wanted to ask the full question just so that you can kind of circle back on it. Just to understand and clarify, the tracking with Facebook only affects iOS apps that have Facebook SDK, correct? Would the privacy changes impact the web visitors that are using a mobile browser such as Chrome, Safari, or on iOS?
So the answer is yes. What this update affects is most definitely users who are going from any app, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever it is, to a mobile web browser. That's one of the main things that's being affected. If on that screen with that ATT prompt, they refer to cross app tracking, and so that's what's super impacted by this. One thing we didn't talk about, this also impacts like if you're doing app installation ads, whereas before we could actually run an ad campaign on Facebook for, like, let's say your favorite app, whatever your game is, right? And with the cross app data tracking, we knew when that user installed that app on iOS, and we would attribute it back and say, oh, cool, we got an app install out of this. This has affected that whole thing as much, as much as the web tracking. It's just kind of overall a smaller audience because not everyone has their own app that they're promoting, but this has made big impacts on the whole app advertising side as well, in similar fashion of we're losing that data from the iOS platform when a user's going back and forth between Facebook or Instagram or whatever and any other app. That's what's being disrupted. So whether it's an app or a web browser, it's kind of all the same.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to add on this too, because I actually had two different, both on Chrome and on Firefox, I had two different ad tracker blocks on my browsers. And when I had those turned on, many sites that I would visit for Shopify became unusable. So I do caution people that if you do have different apps that are putting tracking on your site directly, I know it's a little bit sidetracking from what we're talking about, but if you do have these things that are on there that are tracking people on your site, do keep in mind that more and more people are also opting in or opting out of tracking, if you will, but they're opting into these plugins that prevent tracking on browsers as well, and it does absolutely impact the user's experience on your site. Like there were sometimes where I just literally couldn't even see entire sections of pages. So I do caution people to know what you're installing on your store, understand what those implications are, and what happens if someone does have an ad blocker turned on. I ended up having to turn mine off because it prevented me from doing my job, but there are a lot of people that are keeping those on, and especially as they become more aware that that's an option for them too.
Right. Yep.
Okay, Jennifer also asked, what if we're not down freely handing over our customer info to Facebook and Instagram? Is there anything through our Shopify shop for analytics that can give us the data?
Two quick parts of that. One is that you're never really handing over all your data to Facebook. And that was one of the things about my little tracking tongue-in-cheek joke that I made early in the presentation is, even if you export your customer list from Shopify and you upload it to Facebook, Facebook doesn't actually receive or store any of that personally identifiable information, names, email, phone number, any of that. They hash all that data and it's added as like hashed user IDs and audiences, but Facebook never stores any of your customer data. So to kind of alleviate concern on that, I mean, we've worked with financial institutions, we've worked with like all sorts of like really high security clients and brands that still use that process because that uploading data process is hashed and secure. So to kind of alleviate concerns there, there isn't a way specifically with Shopify on like user data and stuff like that, if I'm understanding the question correctly. But just to kind of alleviate the concern about sharing all your customer data with Facebook, if you're advertising your store on Facebook and Instagram and stuff, you want to share data back because that's how the platform learns what's working and does more of it. So you want to be doing that to a degree anyway. And when you share customer information, it's never actually like their actual information. It's just hashed and encoded like as an audience or something like that. So it's not as much of a security concern as it could seem.
Yeah, I think I feel you, Jennifer. I don't know if you're still here or not, but I feel you. There's a lot of mixed emotions with it, but it's sort of the two-headed sword, right? Where it's like, if you want to know the information, you have to provide something. And I agree with Brett. It's not like you're saying this particular person looked at this information.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
and as an alternative, one of the things we talked about, okay, if you don't want to do customer list just on principle or whatever, totally fine. Maybe instead you can use an audience of people who have engaged with your Facebook page in the last 30 days, which you never actually get the names and IDs of those people. It's just an audience that Facebook creates of all the users that did that in the last 30 days. So if you want to stay away from customer lists too, totally fine. There are other options that you can use to create audiences and target.
And when in doubt too, that's why Brett's email is still up. So you can always feel free to reach out to him if you have a specific question based on your individual needs too. Jan asks, my purchase conversion is my top priority event and lead conversion is number 5. If I move lead conversion to number 2 and lead purchase number 1, will it affect my purchase conversion for the 48 to 72 hours while the change for lead priority is made? Basically, should I turn off ads for 72 hours if I need to edit my purchase event to add value optimization?
I don't think you need to turn your ads off. And the other thing that's important to remember with the pixel event prioritization and aggregated events manager is you got to think of like the customer journey, right? And the example I showed was kind of a reverse engineered of a customer's going to hit your website, they're going to look at some product detail pages, they're going to add to cart, and then they're going to make a purchase. So we had purchase prioritized as number 1 because that's like our ultimate goal. If you think about your customer kind of flow on your site, is it likely that a customer in the same session is going to submit a lead and make a purchase? And then how are you prioritizing as such? Because the way it works with aggregated events manager is you're going to get the top prioritized event, right? You're not going to get all the other events like we used to. You're only going to get the main one. So it might be okay to have your lead event farther down. It just kind of depends what your priorities are and how your site's structured. But if you're making changes, I know there's a thing that comes up that's saying it takes a certain amount of time. That amount of time has actually been cut down recently. I wouldn't stop ads. I would just make the change and then just kind of know that, there might be a flux of like 24 or 48 hours. But I don't think you need to turn off all your ads or do anything like that. I think you'd be okay to keep moving. And then those changes will be in place, as soon as they take effect and moving forward.
All right, I've got just a couple more questions, and I know that we're a little bit over where we were hoping to be. So if you have any more, please do put them in the chat. Hopefully I'm saying your name correctly, Nyan. Can I do all this for third-party domains, as in a domain that is not owned by me?
Yeah, so unfortunately not. And I can explain just a little bit on that and give a quick kind of solution possible workaround. So the challenge with third-party domains is that we're not able to verify them in Business Manager because obviously we don't own them. The one solution and workaround for that is if you can use a vanity URL for like that third-party domain. So if you can use like a subdomain of your main domain. So if I did like, domain.scopomarketing.com, if you can do something like that, the domain verification is based on that main URL, right? So whatever it is, .com, it doesn't include subdomains and everything like that. It all rolls up to that main level domain. So if you can use a vanity URL, that's one way around it. Facebook recently announced that you can still, before you, they weren't even letting you optimize for events and all that if you didn't have your domain verified and your aggregated events manager prioritized. You can still advertise and you can still reach users who either opted in for tracking or on Android and stuff like that, but you won't be able to reach opted out iOS users and track them if you don't have your domain verified. So it's something that's still in the works, and I hope that there's some solutions to come. But if you can use a vanity URL, a custom URL, that works. Short of that, though, unfortunately, it's not possible right now to verify third-party domains.
Okay. And again, hopefully I'm saying your name correctly, Anilu. Do you recommend adding the URL parameters directly on the platform, or is it okay if we have it already added to the final URL?
That would that's a good question. And I can find out. If you want to send me an email, I apologize, I don't remember the name, but whoever asked that question, if you want to shoot me an email, I can check with my engineer who is like super deep in the weeds on knowledge on that. It's pretty easy to add them, but I understand what you're saying about if you already have URL parameters in the URL. Essentially, what you have to do is you either have to add the URL with the parameters into the website URL box in your ad, as far as where you're sending the traffic from your ad, or you can append them down below in the URL parameter builder. I don't think it matters. As far as I know, I don't think it matters where you add them as long as they're there. So if you already have the URL and the parameters added and the structure built out, you can just paste that whole URL right into the website destination URL and not mess with like the URL parameter field in the builder. As far as I know, those are the same thing, but I can find out for sure and let you know.
Okay, cool. So hopefully you hear that. Analu, I think is how you say your name. Feel free to reach out to Brett directly. And then our last question. Oh, good. I think that they saw it, so that's good. Our last question. So if you have any other questions, now's the time to put them in the chat. Jan asked, if I already have the new Facebook app set up, how do I determine if data sharing is set to a maximum?
If you already have the app set up, I want to make sure how do you make sure your data sharing is set to maximum?
Mm-hmm.
So there's one kind of surface level way, and then there's one more in-depth way. The surface level way would be we showed, actually I think it was the last screen, so I can go up. If you go in Shopify and you hit the Facebook app and you go into the settings and you look under data sharing, if this is on and you've confirmed it and saved it and everything and it's set to maximum, it should be set to maximum and you should be good. The other way that you can look at that is if we scroll back up a little bit, if you're in your events manager in Facebook ads manager and you go into events manager, right now you can see on the bottom part of the screen, it says connection method, one of the columns, and it says browser. If you have maximum data sharing set up and you have conversion API enabled, which would be a sign that you have it set up, that will say browser and server there. And so that's a good way on like the Facebook side to double check. If you have it set as such in Shopify, you should be good. But if you want to kind of do a double check and make sure you're getting browser and server events, when you come into this events manager under connection method, it will say browser and server, and it will show you getting events from both sources. And that would be an indicator that you have your data sharing set to maximum and it's working properly.
Wonderful. Great. Well, I think that was all of the questions. So thank you so much, Brett, for talking us through all this. I know I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did. And feel free to connect with Brett directly if you have any further questions, or you have my contact because I'll be the one emailing you and I'm happy to connect you with Brett if needed. But thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope to have the recording out to you later tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. So thanks again and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, everyone.